Hello, and welcome to the second episode of Tigress on Tuk-tuk with me, Sara Mohan. This is a nature podcast specially made for you, my dear fellow urbanite. This show exists because I love nature and I love talking about how much I love nature. I think the nature experience is so unique for each one of us. For me, it's something that has always been simmering in the background no matter whatever else was going on in life. It wasn't just one single life altering moment. Like, I didn't visit a jungle when I was 6 years old, see a tiger, and boom, my whole world changed. Don't get me wrong, seeing a leopard or an elephant in the wild is a whole other level of mind blowing, but that's not what sparked this journey for me. I've grown up in a city all my life, and I'm a city girl through and through. So, for the most part, my experience of nature has been a very urban one. And I didn't realize how important this is. I didn't acknowledge it to be as soul changing as spotting an elusive wild animal in some faraway forest or magical mountaintop until I was doing my master's and worked on a project which involved looking at nature in cities. Appreciating, enjoying, protecting nature that's immediately around us. Everyday nature is super important, especially right now, as more and more people are living in cities. According to a UN report, more than half the world's population already live in urban areas. In India, according to the census, about 35% of the population is urban, although things like satellite imagery suggest that it's way higher. How many of those people will get a chance to run off to a forest, do you think? So, on today's episode, we're talking about urban wildlife that's all around us, living, breathing, thriving right here in our cities. Our guest today is someone who I'd put down on my guest wish list years ago when I first started making up my episode ideas. I'd followed some of her work and knew that she was the one for this episode. She's got an incredible CV with all kinds of work experience, and I'm going to get into her career path a little in just a minute. And then there's the stuff that's not on her CV but should be, like her attempt at spider rearing in a research lab, which I was told is almost impossible to do in a species that is cannibalistic, hand collecting rainforest tree seeds and caring for tiny baby rainforest tree saplings. She's besotted with spiders. Wasps are besotted with her. In fact, people close to her firmly believe that she secretly emits wasp pheromones into the air. I saw this too. She is for sure exuding some kind of sexy insect love chemical, which wasps in particular find tantalizing. Funnily enough, she started with an undergrad in commerce, but went to great lengths to get her foot in the wildlife and conservation door. She also makes perfectly fluffy omelets and fed me breakfast. We chatted in her living room with a fantastic view of her full-of-life balconies. We went to her office and hung out for some time at her buzzing work desk. And we even went on a nature walk to spot some of the things she was talking about. You'll hear snippets from all of these conversations. Here's the lovely lady of the twinkly eyes and the delightful Twitter feed, Vena Kapoor.
My name is Vena Kapoor. I born and brought up in Chennai. I am now based in Bangalore, but I've been traveling a bit and do parts of my life in different cities.
Do you think you put your commerce degree to any good use?
For a little bit of time, maybe, because for a few years I was working in the administrative arm of Nature Conservation Foundation. So in fact, people do make fun of me saying, degree in commerce, why are you struggling with numbers?
From the first time we spoke on the phone, I felt like I'd known this woman a long, long time. And then I met her and found out we have much in common. We're both Madras girls, born and raised in the city of Chennai, and at different points in time, we both went to Ethiraj College for our undergrad. It's one of the oldest institutions here in Chennai. More specifically, we both went to evening college, we both bunked classes left, right, and centre, and were pros at getting proxy attendance.
Very often we wouldn't be in class, and this was before the time they realized what everyone was doing.
Right.
And before they raised the level of the walls in the college.
Go ahead, jump, jump!
After her days of wall jumping and part-time gigs, Vena's first job at the Center for Indian Knowledge Systems in Chennai took her straight into the world of ecology. Right from the get-go, she was always interested in the little creatures of the world.
So there I worked as a research associate. They were interested in organic farming as well as thinking of using spiders as natural pest control agents.
Okay.
And so I had to do a lot of research for them, meet a lot of farmers, do a lot of kind of surveys in paddy fields and cotton ecosystems, and look at what kind of insect life and spider life was there.
Now, this is where Vena, along with the team that she was working with, tried to rear spiders and found out that it wasn't quite like raising chickens. She then carried down this path through different assignments and completed her master's in ecology against all sorts of crazy odds.
Unfortunately, that patch of land where I was supposed to do my thesis work burnt down just before I went.
Oh my God.
So then I started scouting, and I only had 3 or 4 months to do my master's thesis.
Okay.
And so I started scutting around. I finally...
Fortunately, she figured it out and got the job done. She was then part of a rainforest restoration program in Valpare in South India. Here, she was involved in collecting rainforest seeds, monitoring newly planted rainforest tree saplings, and understanding how well these little patches of forests were doing amidst a highly disturbed landscape of tea and coffee plantations. How did she do this? Why, using spiders, of course. Spiders have been central to most of Vena's life pursuits. Now pay attention to this bit because it'll make sense later in the episode as well.
That's the kind of landscape Valpare is. It's a plateau. It's surrounded by the Indira Gandhi Wildlife Sanctuary. And then in the middle, within this large plateau, are large areas of tea and coffee plantations that were rainforests that were converted almost 100 years back. But certain patches of rainforest were left within these kind of this large area of tea and coffee. But scientists were finding that these little patches of rainforest fragments, that they were calling them, seem to be hosting a very biodiverse kind of ecosystem within them, right? But each of these fragments were also going through various levels of disturbance.
Right.
In some cases, they were very close to the wildlife sanctuary, and so they were a little bit more pristine, quote unquote pristine, right? In some cases, they were right in the middle of a very busy tea estate that was, used constantly, and so typically it will be much more disturbed. I found that certain patches of rainforest fragments that were closer to the forest had a couple of species of spiders, like 1 or 2 species of spiders, that were thriving there. But if you would go to another fragment that was far away from the forest and was much more disturbed, they would completely disappear. You wouldn't find that species, right? And this is in the same altitude, so there are no differences in altitude or, other vegetation types. So taking all those other variables into account, there still seems to be that certain species of spiders are reacting to the fact that there is disturbance.
We'll come back to that. Vena then finished her MPhil in Conservation Leadership at Cambridge and since 2015 has been heading the Nature Classrooms Project, a nature education program run by the Nature Conservation Foundation, or NCF, and works with educators to connect school learning to the natural world. I think that all the experiences she's had makes Vena an authority on wildlife of the city. The other thing is that she only has eyes, ears and heart for the smaller, often ignored, but ever-present life forms around us urbanites. Vena talks about where to find urban wildlife, how to nurture it, and she keeps it real simple and ridiculously relevant to urban living and the urbanite mindset. In an urban setting, which is what we're talking about today, Most people have these, especially us city dwellers, have this notion of what wild means, be that wild spaces or wild creatures. But can you put that in the context of a city or an urban setting and define that?
My reckoning actually is a little much more recent in terms of just being amazed by the amount of biodiversity that you can actually find in a city also, under certain conditions, of course.
So Vena is talking about the animals, birds, insects, frogs, reptiles and plant communities that have adapted to live in human-dominated landscapes, playing very important life-sustaining roles even under highly stressed conditions. So the butterfly on your hibiscus plant or the gecko on your balcony wall, yeah, it's legit to call them wildlife. Now, the term urban wildlife or urban biodiversity has been around since the 1900s, but it has only really captured the attention and imagination of people in the last couple of decades or so. There's even an urban wildlife Wikipedia page that's been in existence since 2009. So yeah, it's definitely a thing now.
Now, of course, you would find certain groups or certain insects or certain spiders or even certain groups of birds that are able to adapt to urban life much more than other groups. Sometimes in a very disturbed kind of an area, you would find one or two species that are thriving, that seem to really like that kind of a thing or are able to adapt to that kind of a situation.
Urban systems are a mishmash of highly disturbed or sterile areas within which are little pockets that, to different degrees, function as strongholds for different creatures. Some do great living alongside us, some we completely screw over.
For example, even a small little green patch that is not manicured or tended to too much or is not very neat. It's not just plants in little pots that are kept aside.
Yeah.
Even a small little road, if you have some vegetation that you allow to grow along your in front of your house or a balcony, just a little bit of vegetation that is left wild can attract a lot. If you allow for a certain amount of wildness and complexity in the kind of vegetation, you'll be amazed by the kind of life that flocks to it in some sense.
So it all starts with the plants. Obviously, they are the very foundation upon which other living communities can establish themselves. Now, there are numerous debates on what kind of plants to grow, and we'll get into a couple of these things. But to keep things simple, focus on complexity, as Vena said. And what she means by complexity is a couple of things. Variety in types of plants, flowering plants, fruiting plants, foliage plants, plants that help give shade and cover. Then there's also plant size, from small little herbs and grasses to mid-sized bushes, and, if you have the space for it, big trees. So you don't want this uniform, compartmentalized, basically boring look. You want different levels as it creates different niches or little positions or gaps for various creatures to survive, even in a relatively small space.
I sometimes just throw random seeds around, whatever I get. I don't go looking for them, but if I find something, I just pick up something and I throw it in the thing. Whatever comes, right? Again, serendipitously, I realized that some of the pots that I borrowed, that my colleagues who were leaving Bangalore left for me, I think they had plants where soil was collected from a really rich ecosystem, possibly. Okay. And so all sorts of things started growing out of those pots. And this is like grass, what we would call otherwise weeds. But there were also little very interesting wild herbaceous things that were growing, right? And things which you would otherwise not notice. Very small flowers and things like that. You would find butterflies coming and visiting it, moths coming, beetles sitting on it,
Okay, so I'm going to make a strong case for grasses, and I'm not talking about the plain green lawns you see everywhere that nobody can step on, the Korean grass or whatever it's called.
Would you please stay off my friggin' grass?
I'm talking about those unknown, slightly wild-looking plants that we often tend to call weeds. Now, in my balcony, like Vena's, you will find that almost every flower pot has some kind of grassy thing erupting out of it. Initially, this was because I was too lazy to sit and pull them out, but then I started noticing all kinds of creatures coming to visit these gorgeous, inconspicuous little flowers or to just hang out. In the show notes is a great article I've linked by author Neha Sinha on letting grass grow. Honestly, if anything needs weeding out, it's our silly plant prejudices and our notions of what's beautiful.
So this idea of pretty and what is nature is, unfortunately, this image of possibly what's being fed to us through the documentaries that we watch, and those are typically from the global north, or and like you said, the wild areas and wildlife is thought about as something which is far away, which has to be in forests, which we won't get in the city. Of course we won't get in the city. We have to go somewhere far away to experience that.
Which is so far from the truth. The other thing that could act like a giant neon sign to attract wildlife into your space is a tree, or two, or three.
I speak for the trees.
It helps that I have a nice large tree in front of my house. I live in a small little building complex, and I'm on the second floor. But I've left my 2 balconies completely wild, as you noticed. But it helps that I have a tree in front. Right, so I don't know whether it's a combination of that that allows for things to, just come and visit my balcony. I recently had a sunbird family building their nest in my balcony.
Okay, sunbirds are these beautiful little iridescent fairy creatures. Birds in this group weigh under 50 grams, some even as little as 5 grams. They possess a thin, curved beak with which they poke into flowers to drink nectar. I found sunbirds in my garden to be bossy little things. Despite being tiny, these winged jewels flit about like thugs, guarding the plants whose flowers they feed from. Seriously, I've seen one physically body slam a bee out of a yellow bellflower.
But last year during lockdown, just after lockdown, I had a drongo family coming and building their nest in front of my window on the tree. And I had great views throughout, from the time they started building their nest to the time the chicks fledged.
Vena is talking about the black drongo, a glossy black bird with loads of attitude. They fearlessly defend their nests with a lot of pecking and chasing and screeching, and are known to take on crows and predatory birds much larger than themselves. Drongos are perhaps the most common birds you'll see perched on electric wires and are easy to spot with their deeply forked tails.
Again, I've seen areas that have open wild plots still, around. That seems to attract a lot of things. And so it really is imperative that if we do have it in our power, or if we have some kind of influence over, say the corporation or the municipality, to get this message out there that, things that they term as weeds or shrubs or herbs that are growing should just be left alone. Because that creates the base for so many life forms, right? Be it beetles, be it butterflies that need to lay their eggs, and caterpillars that then need to feed on those leaves. And very often it's those, under shrub, under story kind of vegetation that is very important for these life forms.
This reminds me of Vena's rainforest work in Valpare and how forest fragments closer to the national park had more kinds of species living in them. So open plots or small groves of trees in our neighborhoods act as little reservoirs from which urban wildlife can disperse. Okay, now zoom out and apply this at a city level. Most Indian cities have great green spaces or habitats within them. These act as havens for urban wildlife, and from there they can spill out into surrounding areas, provided we city folk let them.
I think there's also a little bit of a cultural thing here, possibly in Karnataka, Bangalore, that people like their plants. You'll see a lot more places with little gardens or in front. That's changing, of course. You'll see lots more concrete here now than before. Even new houses are being built. They're either completely concretized with no room for any garden, or if people want plants, they're just in these little pots that are kept around. Or it's this very sterile idea of what a garden is. it's very manicured lawns. It's these very pretty kind of large plants that actually serve, they look pretty, they look nice, but there's no functional purpose to it often. So you won't find insects visiting them. You won't find birds coming and sitting on them, right?
There has been such a plant boom during the lockdown, right? I mean, I upped my gardening game in the last 2 years, that's for sure. Look, I have my fair share of pretty or popular plants, especially indoors. But the next time you're at the nursery, don't gravitate towards the good lookers or whatever plant the nursery guy is trying to sell you. Instead, follow the pollinators. What are the butterflies going for? What flower is that bee burying itself in? These have become my standard questions on nursery visits. World over, there's been a great shift towards wildlife-friendly gardening, and one of the key things that's recommended is pollinator-friendly plants. Nurseries abroad have whole sections dedicated to this. Here in India, it might be slightly harder to find things if you don't know what to look for, and that's where my follow the pollinators rule comes handy. But it can be done, and one general rule of thumb is going for plants that are native to India. So plants and flowers that are from the subcontinent and have supported local wildlife for eons. Mind you, the native versus exotic argument sometimes takes you into murky waters, but it is a good way to get your wildlife-friendly space set up.
Or even the medians along the roads, when they're planting stuff, it's these very, like these topiary shaped kind of bushes.
Yeah.
As opposed to, allowing for calotropis or hibiscus and, other things that were growing earlier.
Right.
They used to grow earlier are being completely replaced by these things that need constant pruning and care.
Yeah.
And again, serve no purpose.
Now, you're better off focusing on plants as opposed to other wildlife-friendly features like bird feeders, for example.
There's a lot of research now showing that you don't actually need to put bird feeders.
Really?
In a place like India, you don't need it.
Oh, really?
See, it becomes important, I think, in more temperate areas where you have this very harsh winter-like conditions. Right? So you need to possibly provision.
Right.
So here we may not need to have bird feeders at all. Because they're able to they still have provision for food throughout the year. Some people argue that it's also possibly creates for a group of birds that are more competitive to be able to take over areas where they were not large in number, simply because of this food availability concentrating in one place. So they may be actually driving away other more vulnerable species that are not so adapted to our way of living.
Oh,
right?
Okay, that's interesting.
Pigeons, for example.
Yeah.
People are feeding pigeons all the time in cities, and they have become pests, actually, right? They can possibly take over areas, completely, shoo away other species of birds if they're in large numbers, and they can eat anything, any rubbish, right?
Yeah.
And so other birds that are very specialized may then suffer as a result.
Okay, fill in the blank. All I have is a terrace, yard, balcony, community garden, sunny windowsill, lonesome corner in the parking lot. It doesn't matter. And it can all be turned into some kind of habitat for creatures in your neighborhood if you just stick the right plants in. So yeah, space shouldn't be what's stopping you. In fact, you could even start thinking vertically and use plants like climbers and creepers to cover up concrete or fences.
Oh, wow. So these are great things to do, right? Like having almost like plant walls and creepers.
Exactly, exactly. Just these chain link things that have plants around have... Again, we'll have lots of things coming to it.
What are some of the unexpected little corners where you'll be so surprised about life that you would find? I know you've spoken about this before, but yeah.
Within your home, just look at the corners of your, where the walls meet, the little kind of corners. You would find this species of spider called the disc web spider. It's a small little tiny spider, but very common. Look at your ceiling, you find these very common spiders called the daddy long leg spiders. They're the common name, at least. Also called cobweb spiders. great at catching flies and mosquitoes and things like that. So if you're not too queasy about having them around, they're lovely to look at and observe.
Yeah.
You can take away the old webs that seem to be gathering a lot of dust. Those can be removed, but otherwise the spider's doing you no harm. You can leave it there. Look at the gates in your house. If you have a gate, sometimes you would find these mud dauber wasps making their little nests. You'll see little conical mud kind of casing on the gates. Basically, that's created by a mud dauber wasp. And inside that casing, they look like little capsules actually. Inside that casing, you'll find a paralyzed caterpillar that it's brought inside. And it's basically food for its larva that is inside.
Oh, wow.
That's been,
Very
so
badass.
That's, go outside if you have a garage, a tin roof, you'd find again lots of spiders, different types of spiders there. Walk out on your street, look on the walls of your building or home. You'd find bagworm moths, caterpillars. They look like little bagworms. They look like, we call them a worm with sleeping bags. They look like little sleeping bags that they're using. So they're basically caterpillars of this moth called bagworm moths. You'd also find them in the house, in your houses, sticking to the wall. You would find this very, very interesting insect, the larval form of this insect called assassin bugs.
Ooh.
Right, so the adult looks very different. It's this, this, it looks like an insect but with a really long straw-like mouth part, right? But the larval form looks like a very bizarre bug, but that is camouflaged in insect carcasses.
Yum.
Oh.
So they feed on ants and snails and various other things, and also they gather twigs.
Wow.
And they just encase themselves with that. And say they look like little debris running around all over the place.
Oh.
Yeah, so they're, so you would find that. Even in a very busy city, if you're walking along a wall or, just look for them, you'll find them.
So,
sitting,
like a wall is not just a wall, right?
A wall is not just a wall.
Right.
Yeah, you would find all sorts of things. You'd find little fig saplings growing out of cracks of walls in cities. We also looked at the biodiversity on our pavements and waysides.
Okay.
And we've documented that. And rich in life forms. Again, as long as there's some vegetation that's allowed to kind of thrive, right? And not manically kind of cleared all the time and, then paved over. And
So once you have the right plants in, the rest of the gang follows, starting with the insects. If you can get past your queasies and squeamies, I promise you, looking at insects can give you endless hours of delight.
the diversity of insects, just the kind of stages that other kinds of insects also take is just completely bizarre and fascinating.
Yeah, even as we're sitting here, we have this leafcutter bee doing her dance around our heads and microphones. So.
See? That's Vena's insect love juices at work.
I think they're scoping for things. And I also have a small little mud dauber wasp that's built her nest. And they seem to love this desk that I work in.
Okay.
And so for the longest of time, I used to keep saying, I think I'm emitting wasp pheromones because every time I sit here, I have some wasp or the other coming and building a nest. And during lockdown when I was working out of home, I had a potter wasp in my front room coming and building her pot nest all in front of my face. On my side table. Okay. And so I saw the whole process right from the beginning. So I said, okay, I'm definitely emitting some wasp pheromones.
Globally, urban systems are gaining more and more attention, but the amount of scientific work being done in these spaces is still quite low. A paper I'd looked at talked about how most of these studies were restricted to mammals or birds, essentially the creatures that we gravitate to the most, ignoring other equally important but lesser known species like our insect friends. And of course, most of these studies have mainly been done in the West. Thankfully, that's changing, and multiple urban biodiversity studies have come out of many Indian cities in the last decade or so. I will also add that the growing popularity of citizen science and documenting and monitoring by local NGOs has played a big part in all this. What would really help is if government agencies took a cue from this and jumped on board. While we hold our breath on that, we could of course take matters into our own hands with just a couple of tools.
We are lucky to have cell phones now that all of us carry with good cameras. One more thing to add is, see, birds often, if you're lucky and if they're closer to you, you can see them with your naked eye. But often you need binoculars, right? So you need this additional kind of a thing. But with insects, you can actually look at them up close, right? Or you can carry a small little hand lens. So it's a really nice, easy thing to, carry around with you when you're going for walks. But I would actually say, if you're starting out, to not start by just going and taking pictures. Observe, right? If you see something, I would still recommend starting with a notebook and a pencil or a pen and just staring at this and looking at features. Remind yourself, and all of us do that, and I do this myself still. Oh, what is it? What species is it? What is it? What do I call it?
I've personally found that this bogs me down as well. Don't be too worried about names and nomenclature. You'll get there. Instead, look for fluffy butts and stripy feet.
Fluffy butt, oh fluffy, fluffy, fluffy.
Does it have a furry butt? Does it have a weird pattern on its leg?
Right.
Why do the antennae look like this? Or, hey, I saw this spider, but it's building a different kind of web from what I saw yesterday. Why do you think that is? Or I see a web, but I don't see the spider. Oh.
The questions are endless and will help you see the world in a whole new light. This exercise is particularly good to try with children and young adults.
You may not come to a right answer. You may not come to the answer. But the process of inquiry through this is what really makes for a rich learning experience.
So that's what I'm coming to. Yeah, the grown-ups, and I'm specifically thinking of people in my family that I love very, very much, but would immediately want to shoo out, if not do more gruesome things to a poor wasp or a spider that's wandered indoors. I mean, and that they've happened to spot, because there are probably spiders indoors anyway that we don't see.
Yeah.
But how do you address that sort of mentality to parents who then then that's handed down to the children as well, to immediately get rid of things that have come into the house? And it's quite common in an urban setting.
Such an important question, right? And it's a bit tricky. Again, there's no single way to address this. And I think that when we kind of tend to lecture to people, people often shut down. And it also depends on who's lecturing you, right? Now, if you have to lecture your parents, they're like, hey, I gave birth to this little creature, and now she's telling me what should be done or shouldn't be done.
She's precocious.
Somewhere my father's nodding his head.
Yeah, there you go. I have to remind myself about this all the time, because I tend to do this to my mom as well, is to be empathetic to the fact that not everyone has had the experience or the luck to engage with nature possibly as we have, right? Somewhere along the line, we've been fortunate enough to have experiences that have brought us to this realization, right? Again, quote unquote realization. Something in our personalities possibly drives us to love animals, be empathetic to them, right? And it's a combination. It's not one thing for somebody, right? So I think the best we can do, and as people who grow up in cities who've been so far removed from nature, suddenly to tell them, but hey, look at this beautiful bee, it's so lovely, look at it, can be a little bit, but I don't want to look at it. It's a thing that stings, right? And so for them, bees, wasps equal sting.
Yeah.
So we have to allow for those lived experiences, or for those people who feel that way, right? And to say that it's okay that you're feeling this way. But I think the way to approach it possibly, and it may not work for everyone, is to try and show them these animals and maybe talk about their behavior or talk about their natural history, right? Like, for example, everybody knows the honeybees, right? Because it's something that the honey is what we consume. So it's from a very human-centric view. I know the honeybee because it produces something that I consume. But I don't know anything about the leafcutter bee. They have such a fascinating natural history, right? They cut these little portions of leaves, and I now know when a leafcutter bee has come to a plant because I know the pattern it uses, and I'm sure you've seen that too. And the fact that they cut these little neat portions of leaves, we don't know whether they're specific to certain plants. They roll them up, they carry them like, you know, a little kid would carry a rolled up carpet and fly with it. And that's exactly how it looks. It rolls it up, carries it like a little magic carpet, and lines a cavity with these leaves, and that's its nest.
I adore leafcutter bees and watch them at work on the leaves of our gooseberry tree. They also love my mother's rose bushes and bite out symmetrical crescent-shaped chunks from nearly all the leaves. Mum wasn't the biggest fan of their artistry, but I think she started to tolerate them once she knew they used these to line their nests.
And when you tell these stories to adults and children, you can see them, you know, their eyes getting bigger and they get so fascinated. We need to get natural history stories out there. We need to make this popular. We need to show them how amazing the life forms around us are. And advantage of birds and insects and, spiders are, you can find them all around you.
For me, it's helped as a conversation starter to say, unlike the honeybees, a lot of these guys don't actually sting or,
exactly. But how do you convince someone who's convinced that all bees and wasps sting, right? And because people would look at you as somebody who, of course you'll say that.
That's true.
Right? You don't have to, I won't trust you if you tell me that.
I can't lie!
You talk to anybody, right? Anybody will say nature is important, environment is important. Of course it's important, but what does it really mean, right? So it's a little bit of a disconnect, right? Between what people think should be conserved and why it should be conserved and what is important, to what their actions actually are kind of,
in their gardens
or in their gardens, right?
Again, it's this perception of what a garden is, or what is clean and neat, and what should be there. When I was at university in England for my master's thesis, I was part of a project that looked at wildlife-friendly gardening in the city of Leeds. Through interviews and surveys, we collected a lot of information on the socio-economic factors that influenced wildlife-friendly inclinations in people. My mentor and project head later completed the study and published a paper, which I've linked in the show notes. It turns out that people cared about making their space attractive to wildlife because they felt morally responsible and it was good for their well-being. But people also said that they hesitate to do things like letting their lawn grow out because they wanted to keep up with neighborhood standards. In other words, what would their neighbors think? And so they'd go all Marie Kondo on their lawns and blitz it down to sterile tidiness. But then, as the authors of the paper suggest, the opposite could also be true. If a couple of households decide that slightly messy lawns were cool, maybe there'd be more converts. I'd be curious to see how this might work out in a country like India, but maybe try and make overgrown lawns and weedy flower beds a thing, and there might be at least a few cases of monkey see, monkey do. Go on then, mind gamify the neighbors.
It becomes a bit more tricky if you are the only one in an otherwise bleak urban surround, right? Like, so even if your house is the only one that is, got a lot of greenery in it, or a tree or 2-3 trees, but everything around you is concrete.
Right.
I think there it becomes much more kind of difficult to possibly attract things. So while you can do what you can in your own backyard or around your backyard, it's great if you can have a little bit more of an impact surrounding you as well, to actually be able to attract things.
What should we not be doing? And I think this could also be, given your background in looking at things like pesticides in an urban setup, if there are things that we should really not be doing which would mess with nature around us and other life forms around us.
Sarah, it's a bit of a difficult question, and I'll tell you why. Because it really depends depending on the area you are in, right? Now, for example, if I'm living in a neighborhood that is very sterile, maybe very few trees around, everything is concrete, and there is an issue of mosquitoes there, right? And we've allowed for a mosquito population to boom because we've cut down various things, so it's allowed for a large population to be around because maybe we have areas where water is stagnating, which would otherwise, naturally it would, otherwise sink into the soil and things like that. So if we've created these situations, and if we do have a mosquito problem, then to go into a neighborhood and say don't spray for mosquitoes, it's problematic because dengue is an issue, a serious health issue, right?
Right.
So I think when we're also approaching what not to do, we have to be sensitive about some of these things, right? So we have to take it case by case basis. But if people are spraying, and this is where I think it helps to communicate or talk to people as much as possible, though it's exhausting. If you can tell people, okay, we have to spray because mosquitoes are there, it's important for our health. But can we do better going forward, right? Can we make sure that we have, say, vegetation that is known to be mosquito repellents, right? For example, we know that there's a small plant called tumbi. Lucas aspera, I think, is the scientific name. I can show you the plant. It's a small little shrubby plant. Attracts a lot of beautiful solitary bees to it because it has a small little white flower. Very popular in Tamil Nadu, actually. It's supposed to have anti-pest, anti-insecticidal properties. It has insecticidal properties. And a lot of people in villages, or if you go to areas where paddy is grown, they use this quite a bit.
Okay, so this again comes back to complexity and diversity in our urban systems. Every life form out there has got a business to be hanging around, even if you don't see the point. I'll tell myself that the next time I spot a roach. Herbs and plants like tumbi would bring in insects. Some of them we may not fancy, but we definitely need. Bees, for example, or the mosquito's greatest nemesis, dragonflies. Variety is the spice of life and the delicious underpinning for healthy, stable ecosystems.
This is the tumbi plant I was talking about.
Okay.
Right, and these solitary bees, the blue-banded bees, you might have heard of them. They love to come here and
Really?
visit this. Yeah.
For those of us who really need convincing, what are the advantages? I mean, I don't usually like to look at it that way as some kind of a deal you're striking with nature, but I feel like it's good to spell it out, right? Tuning into nature in your urban setup and welcoming nature, nurturing nature in an urban setup. What are the benefits that we humans get out from that? Aside from, of course, the sheer enjoyment of.
And I would argue that should be the starting point, right?
Yeah.
Just this feeling of sense of wonder and amazement and just fascination that we share this world with such interesting, diverse organisms.
Yeah.
Right? And just the fascinating aspect of how evolution has got us here. Or, what is it that's allowed for these life forms to, be present right now, right?
Yeah.
And what is its story telling us, right? So to slightly shift from a more human-centric view of what is nature giving us to just saying that it's amazing that we have all these things around us and that all these things are living lives just like we are living life. They're also trying to survive. And so not to kind of try and, lord over it or to try and tame it and those kind of things. If just a little empathy comes in, I think for us it's great that, to start with that. And imagine for children, starting with this position of being empathetic to all life forms, I think is brilliant. But again, there's so much of research showing us now how engaging with nature, or just having nature around us, or us being present in nature, or just allowing it to kind of look at it and ask questions about it, is good for our mental health and our physical health. And there's so much of research that is now pointing towards that, where people have experimented where, neighborhoods that are greener or have more trees versus neighborhoods that, have nothing. And they looked at adults and children in those two neighborhoods, of course taking into account income levels and, education and lots of other variables. How much crime is reduced, mental health issues are kind of, much better in areas where, greenery is present. Or even children who have access to, playgrounds that are greener.
Right.
How much more they are creative. People are talking about how children with ADHD seem to really thrive in areas that are much more natural and have much more greenery compared to being in a sterile place. Find some quiet areas in your neighborhood. If you live again in a very crowded city-like environment, you'll find quieter neighborhoods. You don't have to go into a park. You don't have to go outside the city. Just find those few little streets and just walk. And sometimes you may not find anything, but that's fine. But you're at least looking at the vegetation. That itself is shown to be really great to just slow down, unwind, and just soak it in.
After so many incredible wildlife stories, I had to know what Vena's craziest, wildest sighting was. It was from some years ago while she was doing a quick insect and spider survey at the Gindi National Park in Chennai.
I used to walk from a very, very busy Koturpuram main road. And I remember this very well. I was walking and I just crossed the bus stop, and I suddenly looked to my left and I saw this huge, it's now called the violin mantis, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know the scientific name for it. It's
Wandering
Gongylus
violin mantis.
gongylodis.
Can you say that again, please?
Gongylus gongylodis. Okay. Yeah, it's got a tongue twister of a name. But here is this huge praying mantis. It's this big, right? It looks like a twig and burnt up leaves stitched to its body. And it also has this interesting behavior of swaying, almost like Sufi-like swaying motion.
Yeah.
And the only reason I found it, and it was so beautifully camouflaged in the vegetation, the only reason I found it, it was swaying in the opposite direction of the wind.
Oh.
Right? So the thing got busted. I was just completely marveling at it. And I was thinking, my God, this was in the middle of a very busy street. And this amazing animal is right there.
She's gushing about a praying mantis the size of your palm like it was some fantastic tiger, right? I think we are just so used to boxing in wildlife, whatever we think of as wildlife, into national parks or wildlife sanctuaries. But if we can get past that, embrace the fact that we have wildlife living all around us, then curiosity will follow. And a curious mind is really all you need. Oh, that and let things grow, follow the pollinators, listen to birdsong, open a window or two, maybe exude some insect pheromones if you can figure out how. Don't squash every spider or wasp you meet, and don't go all Marie Kondo on the garden or whatever space you have. I bet you all the hair on my head that you'll spark joy in the weird-looking beetle on the clothesline, or the noisy koel that jolts you awake at 4 a.m, or the singing frogs in the waterlogged playground next door that keep you up all night. I know I have. Thank you for listening, and thanks very much to the special listeners who gave me your super awesome reviews. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. You too can leave a review if you're using Apple Podcasts, or subscribe to the show on Spotify. Please do. New episodes drop every other Thursday, so we're a bi-weekly show. This episode was produced by yours truly, artwork by the lovely Gemma Jose, title track produced by Prithvi Chandrasekhar, and the fabulous website is developed and maintained by Creatin. I'll see you guys in 2 weeks and it'll be super. In the meantime, keep your eyes, ears, and other impressionable orifices open. Bye. Bye.